They thought it was just an abandoned barn. That's what the officers said when they first stepped onto Harper Farm on the edge of Pine Hollow. Another old structure collapsing under winter snow, nothing but silence trapped in frozen wood and dust. Until Shadow, Officer Daniel Brooks's loyal K-9 partner, suddenly froze. His ears shot forward. His chest rumbled. Then he barked. Not once, not twice. A relentless howl that tore through the cold morning like a warning from heaven. You don't ignore a bark like that, especially not from a dog like Shadow, a survivor of battles far darker than this night. Some officers laughed nervously, already turning back toward their warm cruisers. Probably just a stray animal, one called out. Let's get out of this cold, Brooks. But Daniel knew better. 5 years with Shadow had taught him the language of his bark. The difference between curiosity and terror, between a scent and a scream for help. And this wasn't a normal alert. This was the sound of urgency. The kind that says, someone is down there. Someone is running out of time. We've got hours at best, Daniel whispered, breath turning to ice. If they're still alive. Leave a like and share your city in the comments. We love seeing where you're watching from. And may God bless you as we continue this story of courage, faith, and a hero on 4 paws. The winter wind howled through Boise's outskirts, spreading icy breath across the silent farmland. Beneath the pale moon, Officer Daniel Brooks, a 52-year-old police officer with tired shoulders and a face carved by years of duty, guided his patrol truck along a snowy backroad. Salt and pepper stubble shadowed his jawline, and worry lines sat deeply between his brows, signs of a man who had loved and lost. His navy uniform stretched across a lean but strong frame, maintained more by habit than desire. 2 years had passed since cancer stole his wife, Amanda, leaving him hollowed by grief and haunted by quiet nights in an empty house. Now the world felt colder than any Idaho winter. Beside him sat Shadow, his loyal German shepherd partner, 4 years old, muscular frame cloaked in thick black and tan fur. His ears stood always alert, and his amber eyes reflected sharp intelligence mixed with a gentleness Daniel once believed the world had taken from him. Shadow had been a rescue, found injured and starving after being abandoned by a backyard breeder. Daniel, who once doubted he had space left in his heart, discovered that Shadow filled every silence with unwavering presence. Tonight's patrol was supposed to be simple. Check the perimeter of an old farm the department received complaints about. Strange lights, noises in the night. Just the kind of call the rookies dismissed with a laugh. But Shadow felt the shift in the wind. His tail stiffened, and a low rumble vibrated through his chest. "You feel something, boy?" Daniel asked, voice rough from unspoken emotions. Shadow's response was immediate. He barked once, forceful, then pawed at the truck door. His breath fogged the window as he stared toward a distant silhouette. A collapsing barn with a snow-laden roof, barely clinging to the past. Daniel frowned. "All right, let's check it out." The truck crunched to a stop in front of the property, a once prosperous dairy farm now swallowed by time and neglect. The wooden fencing leaned like weary soldiers after a lost battle. Dead corn stalks rustled beneath the frozen wind. Daniel stepped out, boots sinking into snow. The cold bit at his cheeks, waking him sharper than any cup of coffee could. Shadow leapt out gracefully, nose already working overtime. His paws padded through powder without hesitation. Daniel followed, flashlight casting long shadows against the barn's weather-worn boards. "Anyone inside?" Daniel called out. The barn stayed silent, too silent. No bats, no critters scurrying. Only Shadow's breathing and Daniel's heart thudding under his coat. Shadow approached the entrance cautiously, sniffing around. Then suddenly, he barked, loud and urgent, the kind of bark no handler ignored. Daniel's pulse spiked. "Shadow, show me." Shadow walked inside, weaving through broken beams, eyes locked on the floorboards ahead. Daniel swept the flashlight across the barn interior. Dust and straw scattered the ground, but Shadow wasn't interested in any of that. He stood rigid over a spot near the center, his fur bristling, claws scraping frantically against the wood. Daniel knelt, pressing a gloved hand against Shadow's back to steady both of them. The dog's muscles trembled, not in fear, but desperation, a deep emotional warning vibrating from within. "What is it, boy?" Daniel whispered. His voice cracked as a memory crashed into him. The night Amanda passed, Shadow collapsing beside him on the kitchen floor, nudging his trembling hand as if refusing to let sorrow bury him alive. Shadow always knew before he did. Pain, danger, loss. The dog whined, nose pressing between the boards, tail stiff as steel. Every instinct screamed, alive. Someone needs us. Daniel exhaled a foggy breath that trembled in the cold. "Okay. We're not leaving. Not until we know." He stood and radioed dispatch. "Unit 6 responding. I need backup at the old Harper farm. Possible entrapment. Bring medical." Static hissed back, but the confirmation came. He crouched again, pushing aside clumps of icy straw. His flashlight beam slipped through the small gaps in the warped planks. A faint sound drifted upward. So soft, Daniel wondered if grief twisted his senses again. A whimper. A child's whimper. The air inside Daniel froze harder than the snow outside. His chest tightened, a storm of fear and urgency ripping away doubt. He pressed his palm flat against the wood, feeling the faintest vibration. Shadow barked again, louder, angrier, demanding action, demanding rescue. "You're right," Daniel murmured, tears stinging eyes unaccustomed to vulnerability. "We're not alone." Footsteps crunched outside, backup arriving fast. Deputy Sophia Nguyen entered the barn, cheeks flushed from the cold. She was in her early 30s, athletic build, dark hair pulled tight beneath her winter beanie, eyes sharp with determination and compassion. Raised by immigrant parents who taught her resilience early, Sophia carried strength in her stance and empathy in her voice. "What did you find?" she asked. Daniel pointed at Shadow. "He says there's someone under there." Sophia's face paled. "Children?" Daniel didn't hesitate. Shadow's never wrong. The deputy shone her flashlight into the cracks, her breath catching in her throat as she heard it too. Another tiny cry, like hope gasping for breath. She bolted outside, calling the others for tools. Daniel stayed kneeling, pressing closer to the floor, willing warmth downward to whoever waited below. Shadow nudged Daniel's hand gently, a silent vow. No one would be left behind. The storm outside howled, but inside the barn, a different storm churned. Urgency, fear, and the fierce courage of a loyal dog who believed salvation lay beneath their feet. Daniel placed both hands on the warped boards. "Hang on," he whispered through the wood. "We're coming." Shadow barked, the sound like thunder cutting through winter's silence, as if declaring to the trapped souls below that rescue had finally arrived. Backup officers rushed into the abandoned barn, breath steaming in the frigid air as flashlights swept across dusty beams overhead. The cries beneath the floor had grown faint but steady, like the fragile heartbeat of hope struggling to hold on. Shadow stood steadfast over the spot, paws planted, eyes sharp with determined urgency. His growl hummed low, not of anger but insistence. Their rescue was already late. Deputy Sophia Nguyen returned carrying a long metal crowbar and was accompanied by Officer Ryan Carter, a big-framed man in his early 40s with a shaved head and a stern gaze that rarely softened. Scars along his jaw hinted at past fights and a life that demanded resilience. Ryan's voice, deep and gravelly, seemed to come from someone who had long ago learned not to trust the world easily. He had joined the police after serving as a firefighter, leaving that job only after surviving a warehouse roof collapse that killed 2 of his closest colleagues. Since then, his protective instincts had bordered on obsession. He had promised himself he would never again arrive too late to save someone. "This barn's a death trap," Ryan muttered. "We need to work fast, but careful." Daniel nodded and immediately set to work, wedging the crowbar beneath the warped board. Sweat beaded on his forehead despite the freezing air. Shadow paced in tight circles, then suddenly placed his paw again on the exact same board, insisting on the urgency. Sophia knelt beside the dog, gently resting a hand on his neck. "You're the one in charge here, huh?" she whispered, trying to steady her nerves. The first board lifted with a tortured crack, releasing a gust of stale air from below. Daniel thrust his flashlight downward and saw only darkness, but then a soft whimper drifted upward once more. Ryan worked to pry up more boards while Daniel knelt, calling out softly to the hidden children. "You're not alone. We're going to take you out of there." A faint voice answered, trembling and hoarse. "Please, hurry!" Sophia inhaled sharply, her heart tightening. She had a younger brother who once ran away during a blizzard, and the terror she felt that day resurged, the thought of a small child freezing alone. She blinked the memory away, here and now demanded every ounce of calm. With several planks removed, the team uncovered a wooden hatch bolted shut, painted to blend with the floor. A deliberate concealment. Ryan gritted his teeth and forced the latch until it snapped with a metallic shriek. The hatch door flew up, revealing a dark cellar, deeper than any normal storage space. Daniel shined his light downward. The beam found 3 small children, huddled tightly around a weak lantern. Their clothes were thin and dirty, faces pale from cold and fear. The oldest, a girl about 10, stared upward with huge brown eyes glistening with tears. Her dark hair was tangled around her rounded cheeks. A child built for laughter, not for terror. She clutched 2 younger boys close, one maybe 7 with cropped blonde hair and freckles across his nose, and the smallest no older than 5, face smudged and trembling. They were siblings. The resemblance was clear, and their bond was the only warmth they had left. "Shadow," the girl whispered, as if she recognized a savior. And to her he was. Daniel's voice softened. "What's your name?" The girl swallowed fear and answered, "My name is Emily Cooper. This is Jacob and Tommy." Ryan lowered himself halfway into the cellar to hoist the children up, muscles straining but steady. The youngest clung to his jacket, shivering violently. Shadow sniffed each child, tail low but wagging slightly, comforting them with gentle nudges. As they emerged into the barn, Sophia wrapped emergency blankets around them. Emily kept her arms fixed around her brothers, shielding them from the harsh world above. When Sophia placed a gloved hand on Emily's shoulder, the girl flinched, then slowly relaxed when Shadow pressed his head against her arm. He understood trauma in a way language could never explain. "Who did this to you?" Daniel asked softly. Emily's lips parted, but before she could speak, headlights sliced through the barn's broken slats. More units arriving. Among them was paramedic Sarah Mitchell, a woman in her mid-30s with sandy blonde hair tucked beneath a wool cap. Her cheeks were freckled, and laugh lines hinted at a once bright spirit now burdened by long nights treating others' tragedies. Her swift, gentle hands examined the children, murmuring reassuring words, a warm presence against the cold chaos. "These kids need heat and fluids immediately," Sarah said. "Hypothermia is setting in fast." As Sarah and Sophia evacuated the children to waiting ambulances, Daniel lingered in the dim barn. His heartbeat had only begun to slow when Shadow's ears suddenly twitched again. The dog stared intently into the cellar. Not the children this time. Something else. A sound too small, too muffled for human ears. Shadow's hackles lifted. Ryan lifted a flashlight back toward the opening. "What now?" Shadow growled. Deep, resonant, primal. Daniel felt his skin go cold. "Someone else is down there." He knelt again and spoke through the darkness. "Hello? If you hear me, make a sound." Silence. Then 3 faint taps, like knuckles begging through stone. Ryan cursed under his breath. "This place goes deeper." Shadow barked furiously, echoing through the barn, demanding they act. Now. Daniel gripped the edge of the hatch, staring into the abyss that had nearly swallowed those children whole. The wind outside howled harder, as if urging them forward. "We're not done," he said quietly. "Not tonight." Shadow moved beside him, shoulder pressed against his leg, his message clear. He would go first, and together they prepared to descend where only fear had existed moments before. Shadow stood at the edge of the hatch, muscles coiled, eyes fixed on the darkness below. The barn around them had fallen silent once more, but the silence felt wrong. Not peace, but something hidden, waiting. Daniel Brooks wiped his palms against his uniform, the weight of responsibility heavy on his broad shoulders. He had rescued 3 children, but those faint taps beneath the earth were a reminder that their mission was far from over. The cold wind sneaked through the barn walls, slicing across his face like remorse he couldn't shake. Daniel's heart pounded as he peered deeper, imagining more innocent lives frozen in pitch black. He swallowed hard, fear clinging like frost to his ribs. The memory of losing Amanda flickered, the helplessness, the finality, and he swore he would not feel that same defeat again this night. Officer Ryan Carter positioned a thick rope, tying a secure knot with rough hands calloused by years of grim work. His breath came sharp and controlled, and though his stern expression didn't change, his protective instincts ignited the flame of urgency in him. Meanwhile, Deputy Sophia Nguyen prepared her flashlight, jaw clenched, her steady calm now strained by emotional tension. She wasn't afraid of danger. She feared what she might find. Shadow barked softly, gaze shifting between Daniel and the hole, urging him on. If a dog could speak, his voice would be one of unwavering certainty. "We're going down together," Daniel whispered, kneeling to meet those amber eyes. It wasn't a command. It was a pact. Ryan lowered the rope, bracing his weight. Daniel clipped into a harness, his body trembling, but his resolve unbroken. As he descended into darkness, Shadow leapt with him, landing gracefully just below. Their flashlights cut narrow tunnels of light through a cramped concrete room that reeked of mildew and fear. Pipes ran along the walls, dripping icy water. The space was just tall enough for Daniel to crouch. Shadow sniffed the ground, tail straight, ears angled forward to catch every sound. A rusty door with iron bars loomed in the corner, a cellar prison. Daniel approached, his heartbeat thudding loud as footsteps in a silent church. "If someone hears me, talk to me," he called gently. There was no voice, only labored breathing and a weak shuffling. Daniel shined his flashlight through the bars. A young boy lay curled on the floor, arms wrapped around his stomach as though guarding his last bit of warmth. His brown hair stuck to his forehead, cheeks hollow from hunger. His skin was so pale it almost glowed under the harsh light. When the boy heard Daniel's voice, his blue eyes widened, desperate yet afraid it might be a cruel trick. Daniel's chest tightened. "It's okay. We're here to help you." The boy's voice came out cracked and quiet. "He said no one would ever find me." Shadow pressed against the bars, whining, encouraging the boy to hold on a little longer. Daniel turned to the hinges. Thick, rusted, built to keep someone contained for a very long time. And someone had gone to terrible lengths to ensure that. Officer Ryan called from above in a commanding tone. "Status?" "We found a fourth child, alive," Daniel shouted back. "Need bolt cutters down here, and heat packs." Within minutes, Sergeant Mark Holden arrived with tools. He was a tall black man in his early 60s, a veteran officer with graying hair and a calm authority earned through decades of service. His deep-set eyes showed weariness, but also wisdom, the kind that steadied others. A proud father of 4 and a grandfather of 2, Holden always took crimes against children personally. He lowered the tools and supplies down the rope with hands that had carried more weight than any file or report could ever capture. Daniel snapped the lock open and knelt by the boy. Shadow licked the child's fingers, tail gently sweeping the dusty floor. Little by little, the boy trusted the warmth pressing against his cold reality. "What's your name?" Daniel asked softly. The answer came thin as a snowflake. "Oliver." Daniel helped lift him carefully. The boy was so light he felt like lifting memory instead of flesh. As they prepared to ascend, Shadow stiffened again, head angled toward the shadows at the far end of the cellar. His fur rose along his spine. The faintest sound, a single metallic clink, echoed from behind a second door partially concealed by stacked crates. Daniel's gut twisted. There was more. But Oliver needed to reach the surface. Ryan and Holden pulled the boy up first while Sophia shouted instructions to medical personnel waiting above. Oliver's small body disappeared into the barn's glow, replaced by new hands ready to save him. Below, Daniel stared at the door that threatened to lead them deeper into darkness that refused to end. Shadow's gaze matched his, fierce, determined, and burning with the truth of what lay ahead. Daniel spoke quietly, voice shaking yet resolute. "We're going further." Shadow growled once in agreement, a vow sealed between man and dog. The night wasn't done unveiling its horrors, and they would not abandon anyone left in the shadows. Daniel stood beneath the barn, the chill tightening around his bones, as though the earth itself wished to keep its secrets buried. The narrow cellar felt darker now that Oliver was safe above. Every instinct in him urged caution, but another force, the memory of Amanda's final breath and the guilt he carried since, pushed him forward. Losing more children tonight was not an option. Shadow pressed against Daniel's side, tail straight, muscles tight. His amber eyes locked on the second concealed door ahead. The German shepherd's breath fogged into the cold air, yet his stance showed no hesitation. Courage, Daniel thought, often came in 4 paws and loyal silence. Officer Ryan Carter called down from above, voice deep and edged with concern. "Shouldn't we regroup before going further?" His words held a tremor he would never admit. Ryan knew too well what happened when a building swallowed people alive. He still woke sweating from those memories. But Daniel's voice answered steady, carrying more weight than any command. "Someone is still back there. We're not stopping." Deputy Sophia Nguyen stood watching Daniel from the top of the rope, her dark eyes reflecting equal parts fear and admiration. She understood his resolve and feared the cost of it. Sergeant Mark Holden, towering beside her, tightened his grip on the rope. "We stay ready," he said quietly, experience lacing every syllable. Daniel approached the rust-streaked door. It bore no lock, only a heavy metal latch that screamed defiance. With a grunt and the strength carried by desperation, Daniel slid it free. The hinges groaned like ghosts awakened from long slumber. A narrow corridor stretched beyond, disappearing into pitch black. The walls were concrete, newer than the cellar. Someone had built deeper structures purposely hidden beneath the farm. Each step Daniel took seemed to erase warmth from the air, leaving only dread behind. Shadow led slightly ahead, sniffing the ground, ears swiveling like a radar hungry for sound. Far down the corridor, a flicker of light danced, faint, like a dying candle gasping against suffocating darkness. Shadow growled, not a warning, recognition of danger. Daniel's chest tightened, but he kept moving. He thought of Emily clutching her brothers, of Oliver's trembling breath, and of the tapping signals that cried, "We are still here." At the light's source stood another door, thinner, with chipped white paint and crooked hinges as though it had been hurriedly installed. Daniel reached for the handle. Before he could touch it, a noise shattered the quiet, the frantic scatter of bare feet slapping concrete. Shadow lunged forward, trapping the movement in a pool of flashlight glare. A small figure froze. A girl around 7, face streaked with dirt and tears, wearing a pink sweater too thin for winter. Her blonde curls were tangled, once vibrant but now dulled by fear. Her pale blue eyes stared at Shadow, terrified, yet relieved in the same breath, as though she had been praying for something exactly like him. Daniel knelt immediately, lowering his voice into warmth. "It's okay. We're here to help you. What's your name?" She swallowed, voice barely a whisper. "Lily. Lily Adams." Her words quivered like a fragile leaf in the storm. Shadow gently nudged her hand, and she clung to his fur like he was the only real thing left in this nightmare. Daniel wrapped his jacket around her cold shoulders. As he turned to guide her out, Lily's trembling hand pointed at the door she had emerged from. "He's still in there," she said. "He can't walk." Daniel's breath hitched. Another one. Shadow barked sharply, demanding they hurry. Daniel radioed the surface. "We have a 5th child, and a 6th still trapped. Get a basket stretcher ready. We might need it." Acknowledgement crackled back instantly. The team above moved with urgency, boots pounding, equipment shuffled into place, because when a child was saved, it became a race to save the next before time won instead. Daniel opened the door. The flashlight beam revealed a boy slumped against a wall, no older than 10. His dark brown hair hung over a bruised forehead, and his thin frame shook violently despite being wrapped in a worn blanket. His breathing was raspy, like each inhale scraped through broken glass. Yet his eyes, deep hazel, wide with defiance, locked onto Daniel with distrust. This child had been fighting for his survival alone too long. "My name is Daniel," the officer said softly. "We're taking you out of here." The boy didn't speak. He only stared, watching every motion, flinching when the door squeaked. Shadow moved closer, tail low and gentle. He sniffed the boy before resting his head lightly against the boy's knee. An invitation to trust. Slowly, the boy's fingers curled into Shadow's fur, clinging to the living warmth. "What's your name?" Daniel asked. A strained, barely audible answer. "Ethan." His body tensed again after speaking, as though even that was a risk. Daniel assessed him quickly. Signs of deep exhaustion, malnutrition, possibly internal injuries from rough handling. He couldn't walk on his own. Daniel radioed again. "We need the stretcher. Now!" Above, Sophia and Holden shouted instructions as they maneuvered rescue gear. The rope creaked. The team lowered a collapsible basket stretcher. Daniel secured Ethan in it, never letting go of the boy's hand. Shadow paced protectively beside them, never leaving an angle unwatched. The girl Lily clung to Sophia as she descended partway to help guide Ethan safely upward. As the stretcher rose toward the barn above, Ethan looked down through the ropes toward Shadow. His eyes reflected something unfamiliar, a spark of trust beginning to thaw. Daniel looked back at the dark hallway, still stretching behind him. The feeling wouldn't leave him. The sense that this dungeon had more layers still. This was too big, too organized, too cruel to be only one man's hidden sin. Shadow's ears flicked once more, nose tilting toward the unseen. There was still more to uncover. Perhaps a mastermind yet lurking in the shadows. But tonight, 2 more children were alive because they kept going. And Daniel vowed, as Lily clutched his arm tightly while watching her friend ascend toward safety. "No matter what lies deeper, we will find them." Daniel remained beneath the barn while Ethan was lifted away, the stretcher rope creaking above like an old tree bowing in a storm. The corridor behind him seemed to breathe, each exhale cold and foreboding. The concrete walls were too smooth, too deliberate. Whoever built this had money, purpose, and a chilling absence of humanity. Shadow prowled beside him, his paws silent, but his message loud. Something still lived deeper, something trembling at the edge of survival. Above, muffled voices of medical crews drifted downward. Deputy Sophia's voice cracked once, relief tightening her throat, as she told Daniel that Ethan's pulse was weak but stable. It offered a flicker of hope that Daniel tucked carefully into the pocket of his heart. But hope could not replace urgency, not when another faint sound, softer than breathing, weaker than tears, slid through the corridor. Shadow's ears snapped forward, nose angling toward that whispering plea. Daniel took the first steps into the deeper hallway. His flashlight beam flickered against a metal railing that led downward in uneven stairs. Ice clung to each step, reflecting trembling shards of light. Shadow nudged Daniel's leg before descending first, the dog's confidence anchoring Daniel's courage. Halfway down, a generator hummed below, old, sputtering, yet just strong enough to power a few bulbs. A sickly yellow glow barely illuminated a larger hidden chamber. The moment Daniel stepped in, The smell hit, bleach, metal, and fear. His throat tightened. This wasn't merely a place to hide children. This was a place meant to break them. Shadow darted to the right, barking into the darkness. Daniel swung his flashlight and found a small girl, curled beneath a table. She was around 9, with long, straight black hair matted by sweat and grime. Her copper-toned skin matched someone of Hispanic heritage. Her brown eyes were huge with panic as she pressed herself against the wall, hugging her knees so tightly her knuckles shone white. She wore a faded red jacket, a size too big, maybe once belonging to a brother or sister she no longer knew the fate of. Daniel crouched slowly, palms open. "You're safe now. My name is Daniel. This is Shadow. He's a good boy." Shadow lowered himself, belly flat to the floor, inching closer with soft whimpers meant to ease her fear. The girl's voice cracked as she finally whispered, "Maria." One word, but enough to break open Daniel's determination like a thunderclap. Shadow nudged Maria gently. Her rigid frame loosened just enough for Daniel to wrap a blanket around her shoulders. She clung to Shadow's fur, fingers buried deep as though she feared the world might vanish again if she let go. Daniel radioed upward. "We found a 6th child, girl alive. Need another medic team ready." His voice was firm but shaking underneath. Too many children for one night. Too much horror hidden in this forgotten place. He waited until Sophia confirmed, then turned back toward the chamber. There were still corners unlit, unexplored, and Shadow refused to stop scanning. Then, a metallic scrape. A gate or large cage shifting somewhere further inside. Shadow growled, a deep resonance that spoke of threat and fury. Daniel raised his light again and saw a reinforced metal door, far larger than the others. Bolts thick as thumbs locked it down, and carved brutally across the steel surface, jagged and sloppy. "No more voices." The words chilled Daniel's heart. This wasn't just captivity. It was silencing, erasing. Someone with power and madness built this. Someone still out there. As Daniel approached, Maria's grip tightened on Shadow's fur. Tears welled in her eyes, terrified recognition. "He locked me in there first," she whispered, voice trembling like a dying flame. Daniel's jaw clenched. He checked the lock. Impossible to break by hand. He radioed again. "We'll need a hydraulic cutter and more backup. This could be something much worse." While waiting, Daniel guided Maria toward the stairs. Shadow walked beside her, shoulder brushing her leg protectively every step. At the rope's base, firefighter-paramedic Alex Turner descended to assist. Alex was in his late 20s, athletic, with short brown hair and a neatly trimmed beard. His eyes were warm hazel, but deep fatigue hid behind them. Scars of a career spent pulling broken lives from wreckage. He still believed every soul could be saved, but each rescue left a mark he carried quietly. Alex scooped Maria up gently. "Let's get you warmed up, sweetheart." His voice was soft, the voice of someone who refused to let trauma win. The rope team signaled ready. Maria was lifted away, arms wrapped around Shadow's offered paw, until separation became inevitable. Shadow whimpered once, watching her rise toward the light. When they were alone again, Daniel turned toward that heavy door, the one promising more terror behind it. Shadow planted himself beside Daniel, hackles raised, teeth bared. Not in panic, but in a silent vow. They would not leave until every child saw daylight again. Daniel's voice cracked in the cold air, a mix of rage and prayer. "We keep going," Shadow answered with a single bark, fierce, sharp, the kind that shook the fear out of bones. Tonight, the monsters hiding beneath snow would face the hunters they never expected, a grieving officer and a dog who refused to let innocence be buried. Daniel stood before the massive steel door, his breath rising in cold clouds as if even the air feared what lay behind it. The lights overhead flickered again, struggling against the darkness ready to swallow them all. Shadow remained pressed to Daniel's side, a guardian forged in fur and instinct, unblinking before the threat. Somewhere far above, the muffled sounds of sirens and hurried footsteps were reminders. Hope existed, but only if they continued. Deputy Sophia Nguyen descended into the chamber with the hydraulic cutter slung over her shoulder. The adrenaline in her eyes shimmered like ice catching moonlight. Beneath her calm professionalism was a woman who had spent her life outrunning vulnerability, a defense mechanism crafted from childhood hardships she rarely spoke of. She set the cutter down with a metallic thud. "Let's crack this thing open." Sergeant Mark Holden arrived seconds later, breathing hard from having carried additional gear down the treacherous stairs. His wide shoulders filled the corner of the corridor, a quiet reassurance of strength. He surveyed the ominous message carved across the steel. No more voices. His jaw clenched so tightly a pulse throbbed beneath his temple. Crimes against children were the one thing that always threatened to break the seasoned sergeant's composure. Officers above relayed new intel. The property once belonged to a former school caretaker named Vincent Hale, who vanished months earlier after being investigated for child endangerment. But they had never found enough evidence to arrest him. Hale was in his mid-50s, gaunt and angular with thinning gray hair and unnervingly calm demeanor. Teachers described him as polite but distant. Children whispered that he stared too long. The thought of his measured footsteps pacing these halls made Daniel's stomach twist into knots. The hydraulic cutter whirred to life, echoing off the chamber walls like a mechanical scream. Sparks flew as Sophia sliced through bolts thick enough to restrain fate itself. Every cut was a step closer to whatever, or whoever, trembled behind the steel. Shadow paced, ears pinned forward, teeth bared slightly. He could smell life, fear, and another scent. One darker, one Daniel recognized. Blood. As the last bolt fell, Holden and Daniel braced themselves. Sophia shut down the cutter, breathing heavily, sweat beating against the winter chill. Daniel grasped the handle. The door groaned open like something waking from a nightmare. Flashlights cut through the blackness. Inside, the room stretched wide and horribly empty. No cages, no beds. Only chains fixed into the walls, hanging loose like reminders of horror past. A table sat center, covered by a metal tray. Daniel stepped closer, and Shadow blocked him suddenly, growling deep, his fur electrified by alarm. Holden swept the area with trained eyes. "It's a transfer room," he said darkly. "They weren't supposed to stay here." Sophia's beam landed on a small notebook lying on the table, its black leather cover worn and cracked as if gripped often. She flipped it open. The handwriting inside was sharp, slanted, the writing of a mind obsessed with control. Lists of dates, ages, initials. Hale wasn't acting on impulse. He was cataloging children like possessions. Daniel felt fire ignite behind his ribs. If the man responsible was a ghost tonight, he would hunt him until he became real, and then make sure he never breathed freedom again. Shadow lifted his nose, scenting again toward the back of the chamber. The dog moved with tense certainty to a narrow vent near the floor, large enough for a person to crawl through, if desperate enough. The metal grate had been ripped aside recently. Someone had escaped. Someone dangerous. Holden radioed a perimeter alert immediately. "We have a possible suspect on foot. Armed units to the woods around Harper Farm. Full lockdown." Sophia knelt and inspected the marks on the vent. Fresh scratches and size, definitely adult. Daniel felt the chill of every second ticking by. Somewhere beyond these walls was a predator who would run, hide, and try again, unless they stopped him tonight. Shadow whined, not fearful, but desperate. He pawed once at the concrete where the girl Maria had been discovered. He sensed something else still here. Emotional residue of suffering, not yet comforted. Daniel swept his flashlight one last time and spotted a small object wedged in a corner. A worn stuffed rabbit, ears torn, button eye missing. Likely dropped by a child too weak to hold hope. He picked it up gently, a promise forming in his mind that every lost toy would be returned to warm hands. "It's time," Daniel said, standing straighter than he had in a long time. "We go after him." Shadow stood tall as a soldier, gaze set toward the open vent, the path to a monster. Holden placed a firm hand on Daniel's shoulder. "We're with you." His voice carried the strength of a full force behind them. Sophia gave a sharp nod, face lit by conviction. "Let's bring these kids justice." Above them, winter winds battered the barn, rattling the world like a warning. But below, a different kind of storm gathered, one fueled by righteous fury and the unwavering heart of a dog who had already saved more lives than most men ever would. Daniel took one final look at the empty room with its broken chains. They had found 6 frightened children, but that did not erase the 7th name in the notebook. Shadow huffed once, as if saying the words for him. Not until the last one is safe. Dawn came slow to Pine Hollow, brushing the frozen fields with a pale blue light that made every breath look like smoke from a tired engine. The barn stood scarred and silent now, ringed with patrol cars and ambulance lights fading from frantic red to weary white. Daniel Brooks stepped out into the brittle air, his muscles aching, clothes stiff with dust and cold. Shadow walked at his side, black and tan fur speckled with snow, amber eyes still sharp despite the long night. Around them, paramedics finished loading the last of the children, small shapes bundled in blankets and knit hats, each one a miracle that hadn't been promised. The radio on Daniel's shoulder crackled with unfinished business. Vincent Hale had slipped through the vent like a rat, leaving chains, notebooks, and ghosts behind him. The man who turned basements into cages and winter nights into weapons was somewhere out in the trees, breathing the same cold air as his victims. Daniel's jaw tightened. Saving the children was only half the story. Justice needed a face, a name, and a pair of locked steel doors. Detective Lauren Keene emerged from behind a cruiser, her short auburn hair tucked into a dark beanie, gray eyes sharp despite the purple fatigue beneath them. Snow dusted the shoulders of her long charcoal coat. She moved with contained energy, the kind of precise anger that took shape in action, not words. "We got something," she said, holding up a tablet. "Traffic cam from the service road. Hale's old blue pickup left here about 20 minutes ago. He can't have gone far, not with that storm." Beside her stood State Trooper Jenna Miles, a tall black woman in her early 30s with braided hair pulled into a tight bun under her patrol hat. Jenna's face was angular and serious, but her eyes held a stubborn kindness that refused to surrender to the ugliness she spent her days confronting. She had a faint scar along her jawline from a crash years ago, a reminder of the drunk driver she couldn't save. Since then, she treated every call like a second chance to tip the scales. "Roadblocks are up on the highway," Jenna said. "But there's a gap near the old mill road. If he knows the area, that's where he'll try to slip through." Lauren looked at Shadow, then at Daniel. "You two up for one more run?" Daniel glanced toward the ambulances where Oliver, Lily, Ethan, Maria, and the others were being stabilized, their futures no longer tied to concrete walls and carved threats. He felt the weight of their survival settle in his chest like a fragile, glowing ember. "We're not done until he is," he said quietly. Shadow gave a short, sharp bark, as if to underline the statement. Minutes later, Daniel's SUV cut through the snow, tires chewing up the narrow lane leading toward the old mill road. Jenna's cruiser followed close behind, lights splintering the icy morning. In the back seat, Shadow stood braced against the motion, nose pressed, near the cracked window, pulling in the scents of metal, exhaust, and something sour that made his hackles ripple. The forest thickened around them, pines bowing under the weight of snow, branches forming dark arches overhead. Lauren's voice came over the radio from the command post, calm but clipped. "Last camera ping on Hale's truck puts him near mile marker 12. Be advised. He's likely desperate and may be armed." Daniel slowed as the mile markers ticked by. Shadow suddenly stiffened, then turned his head sharply left, nose working hard. He let out a low, urgent whine, then scratched at the door. "He's got something," Daniel muttered, pulling onto the shoulder. Jenna slid to a stop behind him, boots hitting snow a second later. Together they followed Shadow down a narrow, unplowed path, branches scraping their jackets, the cold biting through layers and resolve alike. The trees broke just enough to reveal a small turnout where a battered blue pickup sat crooked, hood steaming faintly. The driver's door hung open, the engine ticked with leftover heat. Hale was gone. Shadow circled the truck once, then lowered his nose to the ground, tracking a jagged path toward the tree line on the far side. Daniel signaled silently to Jenna. They moved in a staggered line behind the dog, weapons ready but held low. The snow here was churned, footprints half filled by fresh powder. They crested a shallow rise and saw him at last. Vincent Hale stood near the edge of a frozen creek, shoulders hunched against the wind, his coat too thin for the weather. He was in his mid-50s, narrow face hollowed by years of quiet cruelty, gray stubble lining a jaw that barely seemed strong enough to hold his secrets. His pale eyes flicked over them with a brittle calm, the kind that came from believing you were smarter than everyone else in the room. For the first time, Daniel saw the man who had turned his town into a map of missing posters, and he felt neither fear nor satisfaction, only a steady, unshakable resolve. "Stop right there, Hale," Daniel called, voice ringing across the frozen creek. "It's over." Hale's lips curled into something that wasn't quite a smile. "Over," he repeated softly. "The work is just beginning. You have no idea how special that dog is. Those children proved it." The words slithered over the snow like oil. Shadow growled, stepping forward, placing himself between Hale and Daniel with a protective certainty that made Jenna's breath catch. Hale took a single backward step, boot heel slipping on ice, eyes darting toward the trees as if measuring the distance to some unseen exit. "You won't shoot," he said quietly, "not with a state trooper and a camera on your shoulder." I still have things to share. Data. Research. You need me. Daniel felt the gun in his hands, the ache in his arms, the ghost of every case that ended too late. He also felt the beat of 7 small hearts he had seen lifted into ambulances like fragile treasures. We don't need you, he answered. We need you stopped. Hale tensed to run. He didn't get the chance. Shadow launched first. Not teeth and fury, but disciplined speed. The German shepherd slammed into Hale's legs with the precision of a trained takedown, sending the man sprawling face first into the snow. Before Hale could push up, Shadow straddled his back, powerful paws anchoring him to the ground, a deep warning growl vibrating through his ribs. Daniel closed the distance in seconds, boot pressing Hale's wrist down as he kicked a knife away from the man's hand. Jenna moved in from the other side, cuffs already in her gloved fingers, breath steady despite the adrenaline surging through her. Vincent Hale, she said, voice firm but level. You are under arrest for kidnapping, unlawful imprisonment, aggravated assault, and every other charge we can hang on you. The cuffs clicked shut with a finality that echoed louder than any gunshot. Hale's protest died in the air as Shadow's teeth brushed his sleeve, a razor-thin reminder of the line between mercy and consequences. For the first time, the predator realized he wasn't the one in control, and the winter woods, which had watched so many secrets be buried, now bore witness as one of them was finally dragged into the light. 3 months later, winter softened around Pine Hollow, trading blizzards for quiet flurries and long shadows of late afternoon. At the county courthouse, wreaths of evergreen still clung to the doors, leftovers from a Christmas that had felt more like a Thanksgiving service for answered prayers. Inside, the wood-paneled family courtroom felt surprisingly warm. Sunlight filtered through high windows, landing on the worn benches where social workers, foster parents, and officers sat with a collective kind of hope that buzzed just beneath the hush. Daniel sat near the front in a navy dress shirt and clean uniform pants, his hair trimmed short, lines around his eyes a little gentler now. Shadow lay at his feet, wearing a simple black working harness polished for the occasion. The dog's ears flicked toward every sound, but his body was relaxed, as if he understood this was a different kind of mission. On the bench above them sat Judge Robert Henson, a man in his late 60s with soft white hair, round spectacles, and a kindly face that still held the weight of decades of difficult decisions. His deep-set blue eyes watched everything carefully, but today there was a hint of a smile tugging at the corners of his mouth. Beside him at the clerk's table sat Sarah Mitchell, a child services supervisor in her mid-40s with curly brown hair, medium height, and a gentle but unyielding presence. Her light olive skin was framed by faint worry lines at her brow, lines carved by too many nights spent wondering where missing children had gone. Today, though, those lines eased as she flipped through files, labeled with names that no longer belonged to case numbers but to futures. One by one, the children entered with their prospective families. Oliver walked in holding the hands of Tom and Brenda Lawson, a couple in their early 50s with kind faces weathered by years of running a small hardware store. Tom was tall, with a graying beard and the solid build of someone used to lifting lumber and boxes, his brown eyes soft when they fell on the boy at his side. Brenda, shorter and rounder with laugh lines deepening near her brown eyes, wore a bright blue scarf and carried a small bag of snacks, just in case, the kind of woman who had been called Mom by half the neighborhood for years. Lily and Maria sat with Elena and Marcus Rivera, a Latin American couple in their 40s. Elena had dark, wavy hair pulled into a low braid and warm brown eyes that seemed to smile even when her lips were still. She worked as a nurse and had the habit of touching a child's shoulder every time she spoke, as if reassuring them they were anchored. Marcus, broad-shouldered with a neatly trimmed beard and calm demeanor, taught auto repair at the local vocational school and had already promised the girls they could help paint his next project car. The shy boy from the ravine, whose name turned out to be Jamie, sat tucked between Grace and Daniel Cole, a younger couple in their 30s, she a teacher with light freckles and auburn hair in a loose bun. He a quiet software developer with messy dark hair and thoughtful gray eyes. Every time Jamie's hand twitched nervously, Grace tightened her arm around him, and Daniel shifted a little closer, offering silent backup. And at the end of the row, Ethan sat beside Daniel in shadow, dressed in a too large collared shirt and a tie that refused to sit straight. His dark hair had grown out, falling over a forehead no longer marked with bruises, but with the faint tan of afternoons spent outdoors. His hazel eyes were still older than they should have been, but now they held question instead of only fear. His right hand rested almost unconsciously on Shadow's back, fingers curling into thick fur with gentle familiarity. Daniel swallowed when Judge Henson read the final petition aloud. A single-parent adoption application filed by Officer Daniel Brooks to give Ethan a permanent home. When asked if he understood the responsibility, Daniel rose, shoulders squared. "Yes, Your Honor," he said. "I understand that it's for life. I lost my wife years ago. I know what it means when family disappears. I won't let that happen to him." His voice didn't shake, but his heart did. Ethan looked up at him, then at the judge. "I want to stay with him," the boy said softly. "And with Shadow. He hears me when I'm scared. Both of them do." A smile ghosted across the judge's face. "That's a powerful thing," Henson replied gently. "To be heard." He signed the papers with a firm stroke. Petition granted. Applause broke out. Soft at first, then louder as the weight of what had just happened settled over the room. Families stood. Children were hugged. And for the first time, the echoes in this building were not of loss, but of beginnings. Sarah Mitchell dabbed at her eyes, then caught Daniel's gaze and gave him a small nod, the kind that meant we did it without needing words. Shadow wagged his tail, leaning into Ethan's side until the boy laughed, a spontaneous, bright sound that startled even himself. That evening, snow began to fall again over Pine Hollow, but it was a gentler snow, the soft kind that made the world feel smaller and safer. In Daniel's modest house on the edge of town, yellow light spilled from the windows onto the white yard. A crooked snowman tilted near the porch, scarf wrapped twice around its uneven neck, a lopsided grin made from mismatched stones. Inside, the small living room was cluttered with signs of a life being rebuilt. A new backpack leaning against the couch, a set of colored pencils scattered near a half-finished drawing of a dog, and 2 pairs of boots drying by the heater instead of one. Ethan sat cross-legged on the rug in pajamas decorated with tiny stars, leaning against Shadow, who lay stretched out like a furry shield between the boy and the rest of the world. On the coffee table stood a framed photograph the department had gifted Daniel earlier that week. All 7 children standing together in the hospital courtyard, bundled in winter coats, Shadow seated proudly in front, ears perked, eyes bright. Behind them, the adults, paramedics, social workers, officers, smiled with the tired relief of people who had stared into darkness and watched light fight its way back. Daniel sank into his old recliner, a mug of hot cocoa warming his hands. He watched Ethan draw carefully, tongue caught between his teeth in concentration as he added a medal around Shadow's neck. "You got the color wrong," Daniel teased softly. "His medal is silver, not gold." Ethan shrugged, a small smile tugging at his lips. "Heroes should have gold," he said. Shadow huffed as if in agreement and nudged Ethan's hand, smearing the pencil line slightly. The boy giggled. The sound filled the room like sunlight. Outside, the town was still healing. There would be trials and testimonies, therapy sessions and sleepless nights. Scars, visible and hidden, would take time to fade. But tonight, a child who had once stared at concrete ceilings now fell asleep under a roof where love lived. A dog once abandoned and beaten now wore a badge on his collar and a boy's trust across his heart. And a man who had thought his life ended with loss found that sometimes, on the far side of grief, there was room for something new. As Ethan's eyes grew heavy, he leaned fully into Shadow, fingers tangled in fur, breath slowing. Daniel rose quietly, draped a blanket over them both, and stood for a moment just watching, letting the simple, ordinary miracle of the scene sink in. Beyond the window, snow kept falling, silent and soft, erasing old tracks and promising fresh ones in the morning. Daniel whispered into the stillness, not sure who he was thanking. "We made it," he said. Shadow's tail thumped once in sleepy acknowledgement. In that small house on that winter night, the world was still broken in places. But within these walls, there was something stronger than fear. A family. And for the first time in a long time, Daniel believed that maybe, just maybe, winter could belong to the living after all. Sometimes, miracles don't come with angel wings or halos. Sometimes they arrive in the shape of a loyal dog and a man who refuses to give up. In a world that can feel cold and unfair, nights like this remind us that God is still at work, quietly guiding the brave, lifting the broken, and lighting the path home for those who are lost. He awakens courage inside ordinary people, and love inside hearts that once believed they were done growing. Every rescued child in Pine Hollow now has a future, not because the world is perfect, but because hope is stronger than fear and light is louder than darkness. Shadow and Daniel did more than save lives. They reminded all of us that even in our toughest seasons, God sends helpers, sometimes on 2 legs, sometimes on 4 paws. If you believe that every life matters, if you believe that no child should feel alone, if you believe that God still performs quiet miracles every day, then help us share this story. Like this video to spread hope. Subscribe to join our growing family of believers and animal lovers. Comment below where you're watching from, and let us pray together for protection over all children and animals who are still waiting for rescue. May God bless you. May He walk beside you. And may He send an angel, furry or human, whenever you need one most.